Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Whisper. Tonight, we bring you 7 of the most disturbing true cruise ship horror stories ever recorded. Accounts that will make you question what really hides behind the music, lights, and endless blue horizon. These are not fictional tales. They come from passengers, crew members, and investigators who witnessed the unthinkable. Real incidents pulled from logs, security footage, and testimonies buried deep within maritime archives. From disappearances that were never solved to cabins where the air itself feels wrong. From engines that failed miles from shore to voices that kept echoing long after the decks were empty. Each file tonight reveals the hidden darkness of life at sea, where jurisdiction fades, time slows, and help is often days away, because when something goes wrong in the middle of the ocean, there is nowhere to run, and nowhere to hide. So turn down the lights. Let the sound of the waves guide you deeper. And remember, on a ship surrounded by nothing but water and silence, sometimes the most terrifying thing you can hear is a knock from the other side of the door. If you crave true, verified horror drawn from real events, subscribe to Shadow Whisper and ring the bell. Because what we uncover tonight was never meant to be heard. I worked as an assistant security officer on a cruise ship called the Crown Meridian. If you've ever been on one of those massive floating cities, you already know what kind of machine it is. Endless hallways, flashing lights, laughter echoing from bars, the smell of salt and perfume mixing in the air. For passengers, it's a dream. For people like me, it's routine and noise that never stops. I joined the Crown Meridian in 2018, after 3 years working port security in Abu Dhabi. At sea, things are different. You're hours from land, surrounded by nothing but black water. Out here, you can't call the police. You can't flag down an ambulance. You just have to handle whatever comes up, quietly. Most nights were uneventful. My shift ran from midnight to 8 a.m., inside the security control room deep below Deck 9. The place had no windows, just 46 monitors showing live feeds from every corridor, stairwell, elevator, and deck. Sometimes we'd catch drunks stumbling into the wrong cabin, or teenagers sneaking up to the observation deck after curfew. Once in a while, a medical emergency. But what happened that week? No amount of training prepared me for it. It started just before sunrise on a Tuesday. At 6:11 a.m., a man burst into the security office. He was sweating, pale, shaking. Said his wife was missing. His name was Noah Vance, passenger in cabin 723 starboard side. They'd been traveling together for their anniversary. According to him, he woke up around 6 to find her gone. Not in the bathroom, not on the balcony. Gone. I've handled missing person reports before, but something about him felt off. The way he spoke was too clean, too rehearsed. Like he was repeating lines he'd already practiced. Still, I followed protocol, logged the report, noted the time, and told him we'd start searching the decks. After he left, I pulled up the CCTV playback for Deck 7. Every movement on that ship is recorded. Hallways, elevators, even the exterior walkways. Around 11:45 p.m., Noah and his wife returned to their cabin. They looked normal. She seemed tired, smiling faintly. Then at 3:15 a.m., both of them left the room again. That caught my attention. People don't usually go for strolls at 3 in the morning. They walked toward the aft deck, the open area behind the ship where passengers sometimes sneak out for late-night smoking. No one else was visible on the cameras. The ship was quiet, just the low hum of engines pushing through the Caribbean Sea. At 3:28, the couple reached the railing. The camera angle wasn't perfect. It was an overhead view meant to cover a wide area, not capture faces. You could see the two of them standing side by side, talking. Then it turned heated. She stepped back. He grabbed her wrist. She pulled away. He stepped closer. The image flickered slightly. Cheap cameras sometimes glitch from humidity. And then suddenly, she was gone. In the next frame, Noah was standing alone, both hands on the railing, staring down. He didn't move for 20 seconds. Then he turned and walked away. My stomach dropped. I rewound it. Played it again. Same thing, 1 second she's there, the next gone. I switched to the stern camera that monitored the ship's wake, the area behind where the water churns white from the engines. At 3:31, a small ripple appeared, barely visible, just a faint splash swallowed by blackness. It could have been anything. Trash, luggage, a seagull diving. But my gut said otherwise. I called my supervisor, woke him up. We both watched the footage 3 times. He didn't speak until it ended. Then he said quietly, "Call the captain." At 7:20, the announcement went out. Passenger overboard alert. The captain turned the ship around. Crew assembled at every deck with binoculars, scanning the endless gray water. Nothing. By 9 the Coast Guard had been notified, but we were hundreds of miles out. We launched a small rescue craft. It circled for an hour. No trace. Just ocean. Meanwhile, Noah was on deck pretending to search, calling his wife's name for everyone to hear. To most passengers, he looked like a heartbroken husband. But I'd seen his eyes in the office earlier. They weren't panicked. They were calculating. I went back to the CCTV and zoomed in on his hands, his pockets, every detail. His right hand was clenched when he left the railing. His pocket looked heavier when he returned inside. Later, when we searched the cabin, his wife's phone and jewelry were missing. It wasn't until the next morning that I noticed something I should have seen earlier. In the footage, the 4 safety rings, those bright orange lifesavers attached to the railing, were gone. You could clearly see the empty metal brackets behind him. Someone had removed them before 3 a.m. We checked the area in daylight, found the rings stuffed in a storage locker, about 10 meters from where the couple had been standing. That locker needed a crew key to open. It didn't make sense. Why would a passenger have a crew key? Unless he'd planned this. That was the moment my unease turned into dread. I wasn't just looking at an accident anymore. I was looking at a murder, and the ocean had already erased the evidence. When the captain ordered the official person overboard procedure, the whole ship came alive. Passengers were asked to stay in their cabins while the crew formed search teams. On paper, it was chaos being handled professionally. But anyone who's worked security on the ocean knows it's mostly about optics. Once a person hits that water, your odds of finding them after 15 minutes are close to 0. Still, we had to try. By noon, we'd scanned every deck and cabin. No sign of her. Noah stayed visible the whole time, crying, talking to guests, asking if they'd seen his wife in the spa or casino. It was textbook grief, almost too textbook. Every expression looked performed, every word felt placed. I wanted to tell someone I didn't believe him, but I didn't have proof, and accusing a passenger of murder without evidence could cost me my job. That night, after my shift ended, I couldn't sleep. I went back to the control room alone and replayed the footage again. I slowed it frame by frame. There at 03:27:42, both of them visible. At 03:28:06, just him. No motion blur, no obstruction, just gone. The timing between frames made it impossible for her to have walked out of view. She had to have gone over. The ocean camera showed that faint splash at 03:31, almost exactly when he looked over the railing. The 3-minute gap haunted me. By morning, I had an idea. The ship's camera system records GPS coordinates and timestamps separately for every deck. If she had fallen overboard, the coordinates could be used to mark the exact location where it happened. I logged them, handed them to my supervisor, and he forwarded them to the Coast Guard. They searched the area for 6 hours. Nothing. When I came back on shift that evening, the mood on board had shifted. Passengers were whispering. News had spread. In the dining halls and bars, everyone had a theory: suicide, accident, cover-up. The captain made an announcement at dinner saying they were working closely with maritime authorities. That's cruise ship language for, it's out of our hands. But I couldn't let it go. There was one detail still bothering me: The missing safety rings. Only crew had access to those lockers. Yet no one on staff admitted to touching them. We checked the logs. The last inspection had been 2 days before the incident, signed by maintenance. The signature belonged to Noah's cabin steward, a quiet Filipino kid named Eric. When I called Eric into the office, he looked terrified before I even said anything. I asked if he'd ever lent his service key to a guest. He denied it immediately. But when I showed him a still image of Noah walking out of the crew corridor, an area passengers weren't allowed, he broke down. Said Noah had offered him $200 to borrow the key for 5 minutes so he could surprise his wife with something romantic on the private deck. Eric thought it was harmless. He gave him the key. That's how he accessed the locker. That's how he removed the safety rings. That's how he planned it. I filed a full report for the captain and head of security. They called the company's legal team. The order came back instantly. Do not disclose this to passengers. Continue protocol until ship reaches port. In other words, keep it quiet. We were scheduled to dock in Fort Lauderdale in 4 days. The company wanted to hand the case to the FBI there. Until then, we had to maintain the image of a functioning luxury vacation. The pool reopened that same afternoon. They even played music on deck 12 while somewhere beneath them a murderer was sipping coffee and pretending to mourn. I watched Noah constantly through the monitors. I saw him at the buffet, calm and composed. He talked to strangers about how life can change in a moment. I saw him smile when people offered condolences. It made my skin crawl. I started sleeping in the security room, afraid I'd miss something if I left the screens. 2 nights later, the ship passed through a storm. Waves slapped the hull like fists. In the control room, the camera feeds flickered and distorted. For a split second, the aft deck camera, the one where she vanished, went black, then flashed a still frame. Empty deck, swaying ropes, no one there. But behind the railing where the black water churned, something flickered, white, faint, almost human-shaped. Then it was gone. Probably a glitch, probably just lightning. At least that's what I told myself. When we finally reached Fort Lauderdale, the FBI boarded the ship before passengers disembarked. They interviewed Noah first. He played the part perfectly, heartbroken, cooperative, polite. I handed over all footage, all reports, and the steward's testimony about the key. The agents thanked me, said they'd take it from here. I felt relief for the first time in days. I believed they'd arrest him. But 2 weeks later, an email arrived from corporate security. FBI closed file. Insufficient evidence. Case terminated. No charges, no arrest. No closure. I couldn't breathe when I read it. That footage, that timing, those missing safety rings, it wasn't insufficient. It was enough for anyone with eyes. But maritime law doesn't work like land law. No body, no crime. The ocean keeps its evidence. For a few weeks I tried to move on. I'd walk the decks during sunrise, pretending everything was fine. But every time I heard waves hit the hull, I pictured her body somewhere below, drifting in silence while her husband enjoyed the sun deck above. And then something happened that pulled me back into it completely. While reviewing new passenger manifests for the next voyage, I recognized a name. Noah Vance, same last name, different first. But the birth date matched. He'd booked again, this time with a new companion. That's when I realized this wasn't an accident. It wasn't even about his wife. It was a pattern. When I saw his name again on the manifest, my first reaction was disbelief. I remember blinking at the screen like maybe it was a system error. But there it was. Vance, Noah. Cabin 512. Traveling with companion. E. Monroe. Different woman. Same pattern. Mid-30s. Honeymoon package. Same luxury suite tier. Same 7-day Caribbean route. He'd come back, I could have ignored it. Should've. But once you've seen what I've seen, you don't unsee it. I spent that entire day pacing the control room, staring at the booking list. I wasn't officially on duty for that voyage. I was supposed to be rotated off for shore leave. but I convinced my supervisor to keep me on board for training continuity. He didn't ask questions. He was probably just grateful someone wanted to stay. When embarkation began, I watched him through the security feeds. He looked exactly the same. Neat polo shirt, expensive sunglasses, confident smile. The woman with him laughed easily, holding his arm as they boarded. I remember thinking she had no idea that she'd just stepped into a death trap. For 2 days I monitored them quietly. They did all the usual cruise things. Dinner at the Italian restaurant, dancing at the lounge, photos with the ship's photographer on deck. Everything looked normal. But normal is exactly how monsters behave when they know the world doesn't believe in them. On the 3rd night, I followed him on the cameras again. Around midnight, he left the casino alone and went down toward the crew deck. He paused near a maintenance corridor, glanced both ways, then slipped through a service door with an old passkey card. He was looking for something, maybe another access point to remove safety gear again. I knew if I confronted him alone and things went wrong, I could disappear just as easily as his wives had. So I printed still frames from the old footage and put them in an envelope, along with the steward's signed statement. Then I went to the captain. He listened but looked tired. "Rafik," he said, "I can't accuse a guest without evidence. You know how this works." He was right. Maritime law is a different universe. Without a body or a direct witness, the cruise line's lawyers would eat the case alive. I left his office with that envelope still in my hand. If no one else was going to do something, I would. That night, the weather changed. The sea turned rough and the decks cleared early. Around 3 a.m., my gut told me to check the monitors again. Sure enough, Noah and the woman were leaving the lounge, walking down the same starboard corridor I'd seen in the first footage months earlier. My heart started hammering. I switched camera angles until I found them heading toward the aft deck. The exact same route. At 03:17 they stepped into the open air. The camera feed flickered from rain, visibility low, wind tossing their clothes. They stood by the railing. She was gesturing toward the water, smiling, maybe talking about the bioluminescence. He put his arm around her shoulders. Then he leaned close to her ear, said something, and I'll never know what. And she stepped back slightly, startled. He moved in again, blocking her view from the camera. My throat went dry. I grabbed the radio and called bridge security, shouting coordinates. "Get to aft deck 7 now, possible overboard in progress." The other guards sprinted out, but the storm made everything slower. I kept watching the screen. Rain distorted the image, blurring their outlines into gray shapes. Then lightning lit the deck bright white for a split second. And I saw her hands on his chest pushing. She must have sensed it. She fought back. The feed cut out for 3 seconds. When it came back, she was gone. He was alone again. I slammed my fist on the desk so hard I cracked the plastic keyboard cover. The radio crackled, the response team yelling over the wind. "Noah's on deck," says his companion fell overboard. "We're launching flare." I ran from the control room up 4 decks, arriving soaked, gasping. Noah stood there under the emergency lights, clutching the rail, screaming for help. He looked the part perfectly and terrified, broken. The flare burned red above him like a spotlight. But this time I wasn't going to let him vanish behind lawyers. The crew detained him immediately for questioning. I handed over all my saved files. Both incidents, identical times, identical angles. The Coast Guard met us when we reached port. This time, they searched his cabin before he could touch anything. Inside, in his duffel bag, they found 2 crew key cards, a spool of zip ties, and a printed article titled, "How to Handle False Overboard Accusations." They finally had enough to charge him. Not for murder yet, but for tampering with safety equipment and obstruction of an investigation. The woman's body was recovered 2 days later by a cargo vessel near the same coordinates as the first disappearance. The media called him the honeymoon killer. I should have felt satisfaction, but I didn't, because during the final hearing, when investigators reviewed our old footage, they discovered something none of us had noticed before. In the reflection on the aft deck glass, A faint blur behind the couple at the railing, another person standing back in the shadows, just visible for 2 frames wearing a crew jacket. No one could identify him. No record, no name tag, no crew member missing. Sometimes, when the ship moves through certain waters, the new security officers say the aft camera flickers at 0328. Every voyage, every night, like the moment is still replaying itself over and over. I left sea duty after the trial. I live on land now, but I still wake up at 3:19 almost every morning, hearing the echo of water hitting metal and that tiny splash swallowed by the dark. They say the ocean forgets everything. I know better. It remembers imperfectly. I used to love cruises. The endless blue water, the sunlight on deck, the feeling of being away from everything. After 2 years of working double shifts at the hospital, that cruise was supposed to be my reward. 7 days in the Caribbean, just me, the ocean, and no emergencies to handle for once. The ship was called the Marina Sol, brand new, almost obscene in size. Glass elevators, infinity pools, 10 restaurants, a spa that smelled like vanilla and salt. I remember thinking, how could anything bad ever happen here? It was perfect for the first 2 days. Breakfast on the upper deck, a little sunbathing, reading in my cabin until evening. My cabin was on deck 9, an inside room, no balcony but quiet and comfortable. The air conditioning hummed constantly, a sound that usually lulled me to sleep. Everything changed on the morning of day 3. I was finishing breakfast when the captain's voice came over the intercom. Calm, professional, the kind of tone you use when you're trying to make bad news sound small. Good morning, guests. Our medical team has identified several cases of gastrointestinal illness on board. As a precaution, we're implementing enhanced sanitation protocols. Please wash your hands frequently and report any symptoms to the medical center immediately. No one seemed too worried. People even laughed about it, saying it was probably bad shrimp. But by that evening, several of the restaurants had closed for deep cleaning. Crew members in gloves and masks wiped down railings every few minutes. And yet, people still partied at the bar like nothing was happening. When I returned to my room, I noticed something strange. The housekeeping staff had left a letter under my door. It said, "For your safety, please remain in your cabin tomorrow morning while sanitation procedures are conducted." I'd never seen that before. But I figured it was temporary, so I set my alarm early to order breakfast and stay put. At 8 a.m., a knock came at the door. "Room service," a voice said, muffled by a mask. They handed me a tray through a narrow crack. Gloved hands, plastic face shield, the smell of sanitizer so strong it burned my nose. The tray had a sealed sandwich, a banana, and a small bottle of water. No utensils, no napkin. That was the last time I saw any crew member face to face for a while. By afternoon, the captain announced again, his voice less steady this time. "We are suspending all port stops until further notice. Please remain in your cabins. Meals will be delivered. This is not a lockdown, just a temporary precaution." Not a lockdown. That's exactly what it was. The hallways outside were quiet. Too quiet. Every few hours I heard rolling carts and the occasional cough echo through the corridor. I turned on the TV for distraction, but every channel just played pre-recorded announcements. No news, no live signal, just the ship's logo and gentle background music that made everything feel eerily calm. That first night wasn't bad. I read a book and texted my family using the limited Wi-Fi, told them not to worry. But around midnight I started hearing something through the wall. Rhythmic, wet sounds, followed by coughing. The person in the cabin next to me must have been sick. Really sick. At 2 a.m. the sound changed. It wasn't just coughing anymore, it was retching. Hard, violent, non-stop. Then I heard something slam against the wall like someone had fallen. I froze, debating whether to call for help. But who would come? At 3:15, I finally picked up the phone and pressed 0 for guest services. It rang 15 times before a woman answered. Her voice sounded robotic, exhausted. Guest services, please remain in your cabin. Medical staff are attending to all priority cases. When I said the person next door needed help, she paused. Then quietly said, "We're aware. Please keep your door closed." And she hung up. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound from the hallway made my stomach tighten. Around 5 a.m., the retching stopped abruptly. Then silence. Just the distant hum of the ship's engines. By morning there was a smell, faint but sour, leaking through the vent. It wasn't food or disinfectant. It was the smell of sickness. The kind of smell you never forget if you've ever worked in a hospital. I stuffed a towel under the door, trying to block it. At 8 a.m., another knock. "Breakfast delivery," the same muffled voice said. I opened the door a few inches. The hallway was dim. The air smelled of bleach and something worse underneath. A red line of tape now ran along the carpet. "Do not cross medical area," printed every few feet. I took my tray and shut the door. For the first time, I realized I might actually be trapped. The air inside my cabin felt thick. I turned the thermostat all the way down, but the display blinked an error code. The hum from the vents stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. No fan, no outside sound, nothing. I tried calling guest services again. No answer. Around noon, a metallic announcement tone echoed through the ceiling speaker. "All passengers must remain in their cabins. Medical Containment Protocol 9 is now active. Please do not open your doors." That last part hit differently. Do not open your doors. I sat on my bed staring at the handle, feeling the ship vibrate faintly beneath me. I remember thinking, how bad can it be? But deep down I already knew. Once a ship locks its doors, it means they've lost control. And that was only the beginning. The next 24 hours turned the Marina Sol from a luxury resort into something that felt like a floating hospital ward. The ship's engine still hummed beneath us, but everything else, music, announcements, laughter, had stopped. When I woke that morning, the air inside my cabin was hot and still. The AC hadn't come back. Sweat stuck my shirt to my back, and the smell from the hallway had thickened. Disinfectant, sewage, and something human underneath. I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Then, faintly, a voice on the intercom, 2 men talking, one giving instructions I couldn't make out. After that, a knock came on someone else's door, followed by the clatter of wheels and a sharp hiss like a spray can. Then quiet again. By noon, my phone showed no network. The ship's Wi-Fi, which had worked the night before, was gone. Every time I tried to connect, the login page just spun and timed out. No news, no messages, nothing from the outside world. I was completely cut off. When I opened my door a crack, the hallway lights were dimmed to red. The tape on the carpet had multiplied, bright orange now, zigzagging across the corridor like hazard markings. A black plastic bag sat a few doors down. It was tied tight, no tag, just resting there against the wall. For a second I thought it was trash left behind. Then I noticed liquid pooling slowly underneath it. I closed the door and locked it. Around 3 p.m. the captain's voice came through again. He didn't sound calm anymore. "All passengers must remain in their cabins. Medical staff are responding to a high number of illness reports. Meals will continue twice daily. Do not attempt to leave your room unless directed by crew." No one said how many were sick. No one said what it was. That evening the first cart arrived. This time nobody knocked. When I opened the door a few inches, the tray was already there. Plastic-wrapped crackers, a bottle of water, and a small note that said, "Stay calm. We are doing everything possible." The handwriting was uneven, hurried. I called out for whoever left it. No answer. Later that night, I started hearing them again, the sounds through the walls. Not coughing anymore, but moaning, low and rhythmic, like people talking in their sleep. Sometimes it was right beside my bed. Other times it came from the ceiling vent. Every now and then, something thudded in the hallway, followed by footsteps running and the squeak of wheels. I couldn't tell if it was crew or passengers trying to escape. At about 1 a.m., the power flickered. The light over my bed went out, came back on, then died completely. The emergency bulb in the ceiling glowed a faint orange, making everything look sepia and unreal. The TV blinked to a black screen. No sound, no movement, just my own breathing. Then came the voice, a man shouting from somewhere down the hall. I could hear him through the metal door. "Let us out. She's not breathing. Somebody help." His voice cracked into sobs, then into silence. After that, only the hum of the engines returned. Sometime before dawn, the ship jolted hard enough to knock a glass off my nightstand. I thought we'd hit something. Through the wall, drawers slammed, and somewhere above me, water began running. Steady and uncontrolled, like a burst pipe. Then the smell changed again, raw sewage mixed with chlorine. That's when I realized the toilets had stopped working. It wasn't just heat anymore. It was decay. I pulled my blanket over my face and tried to breathe through it. Hours passed in half-sleep until the next announcement broke through the ceiling. All non-essential crew are to remain in quarters. Engineering reports partial failure of the waste system. Containment teams are working. Passengers are reminded to keep doors sealed. The voice wasn't the captain this time. It sounded younger, unsure. And then, faintly behind him, another noise, like someone vomiting while the microphone was still on. Then a click and the line went dead. By afternoon, the smell was unbearable. I wrapped wet towels around the air vent, hoping to filter it. Didn't help much. The metal of the vent was hot to the touch, which made no sense. The air conditioning was dead. Something was burning somewhere deep inside the ship. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, counting the seconds between distant sounds, bang of a door, the roll of thunder outside, a faint sobbing from another room, then out of nowhere, scratching. It came from the hallway, slow at first, then faster, like nails dragging down metal. Someone or something was moving from door to door, scraping along each one. I froze. The sound stopped outside my cabin. I held my breath. Then came 3 gentle knocks. Just 3. I didn't answer. After a minute, the knocks turned into a whisper. A woman's voice, calm, almost polite. "Please, open, we need help." My throat went dry. I wanted to open it. I wanted to believe she was crew or another passenger desperate like me. But then I remembered the order, "Do not open your door," and the way she said it. There was no coughing, no panic. Just that steady, quiet tone. Too calm, I waited. Another whisper, lower now. "It's hot out here, please." Then silence. I stayed like that all night, sitting against the door with my feet braced against the opposite wall, just in case someone tried the handle. When morning came, the tray outside had been replaced again. No knock, no voice, just food quietly swapped in the dark. That's when I noticed something else, a smear of reddish-brown on the handle. Maybe rust. Maybe not, I didn't touch it. I don't remember what day it was anymore, maybe day 5. The intercom hadn't spoken in almost 2 days. No music, no updates. And yet, through the walls the sounds continued. Coughing, crying, sometimes laughter. Like the ship itself had decided who would stay alive and who wouldn't. By then, I wasn't afraid of the sickness anymore. I was afraid of what the crew was hiding, and the worst part? I wasn't sure if anyone left to hide it was still human. The smell was the first thing that finally pushed me over the edge. By the 6th day, the air in my cabin had gone thick and sour. My towel filters were brown now, damp with something I didn't want to name. I'd been rationing water, eating those sealed crackers slowly, telling myself rescue ships were coming. But rescue never came, no announcements, no knocks, nothing. Just that red emergency bulb blinking faintly in the ceiling, flickering every few minutes like it was gasping for power. I'd stopped sleeping properly. When I did, I dreamed of doors creaking open, of voices whispering right beside my bed. Sometimes I woke up thinking I heard breathing, slow, shallow, inches from my face. But the worst part was the silence between those moments. The silence felt alive. That morning I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed my ear to the metal and listened. The hallway was quiet except for a distant hum. I held my breath and slowly unlatched the handle. It stuck at first, the edges of the door tacky from dried sanitizer and salt air. Then it gave way with a low creak. The hallway outside was dim and red like a submarine under emergency light. The carpet squished slightly under my shoes. I didn't look down right away. I didn't want to. Every few doors a white note had been taped at eye level. Occupied, do not disturb. Others were simply marked with duct tape across the handle. Some had no tape at all. I whispered, "Hello?" My voice didn't echo. It just got swallowed by the thick, wet air. Far down the corridor I saw movement, someone pushing a cart. I hurried toward it, my heart hammering. When I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person at all. The cart was moving slightly on its own, rolling with the ship's gentle sway. Half covered by a sheet were several black plastic bags stacked like luggage. That's when I finally looked down at the carpet. It wasn't wet from water. I don't know how long I stood there staring before I heard the sound. Metal wheels again, this time from behind me. I turned and saw a man coming around the corner. He wore a crew uniform, but his shirt was stained dark down the front. His mask was pulled under his chin and his skin looked gray, almost waxy. He froze when he saw me. We stared at each other in that red light, both not knowing what to say. Then he said quietly, "You're not supposed to be out." I needed air, I said. "What's happening?" He looked past me, down the corridor toward the stacked bags. His eyes twitched slightly, unfocused. "Protocol 9, he said, almost whispering. "Containment failed. We're supposed to wait. For what?" He swallowed. "Evac. When?" He shook his head. "Didn't say." Then his radio crackled with static. He lifted it, pressed the side, but no voice came through. Just the faint sound of gurgling like someone breathing through water. He flinched and shut it off. "I have to go," he said suddenly. And just like that, he turned and disappeared around the corner, walking stiffly, his shadow tilting long behind him. I followed him, but when I turned the same corner, he wasn't there. Only a trail of footprints leading to the stairwell, and a single latex glove lying on the step, still warm. The door to the stairwell had a handwritten sign taped to it, "Do not open, quarantine below." I stood there, hand hovering over the handle, thinking about how long I'd already been breathing recycled air, eating sealed food, waiting for a rescue that might never come. The word below echoed in my head. If the disease was down there, maybe there were still people up here, people who knew what was really going on. So I opened it. The air that hit me was damp and metallic. It smelled like rust and bleach and something sweet rotting underneath. The stairwell lights flickered as I descended, each level darker than the one above. When I reached deck 10, I heard it. A low, constant humming. Not the engines. Something else, electrical, uneven. The corridor here was lined with carts and crates stacked to the ceiling. Doors stood open. Some rooms had beds dragged into the hallway, sheets stiff with something dry and brown. There were names written on the walls in marker, just first names with numbers next to them. The smell got worse. At the very end of the hall, a double door stood slightly ajar. Above it, a sign, "Infirmary, restricted access." I pushed it open and immediately regretted it. Bodies. At least 20. Maybe more. All zipped in clear plastic. Some stacked on stretchers, others on the floor. The air was so heavy I could barely breathe. In the corner, a small table held a laptop still running on backup power. The screen displayed a single document titled Medical Log, Internal. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The first entries were normal. nausea, dehydration, fever. Then they got stranger. Bleeding from eyes, aggression, self-harm. The last entry was dated day 5/23/17. It said only one word: mutation. My vision blurred. My knees almost gave out. That's when I heard the noise again. Soft, wet movement from behind the stacked stretchers. Something shifted inside one of the plastic bags. Then another. The sound was unmistakable. Breath being dragged through fluid. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my cabin, slamming the door shut and sliding the bolt. My lungs burned, and every sound in the hallway now felt amplified. The distant hum, the whisper of air through vents, the faint scrape of something moving slowly outside my door again. The intercom crackled to life one final time. A voice I didn't recognize said, "Remain calm. Containment successful." Then silence. The next morning, sunlight hit my ceiling through the vent holes. The ship was moving again. I heard helicopters somewhere above. When we finally docked 3 days later, officials in white suits escorted passengers off one by one. They never told us how many survived. The news said a few dozen, but the passenger list had over 3,000 names. They said it was a norovirus outbreak. That's the story they printed. But I remember the scratching, the sealed doors, the bodies that moved. Whatever was on that ship wasn't a virus. And sometimes when I'm alone in a quiet room, I still hear the faint sound of metal wheels rolling down a hallway, and a woman's voice whispering, "Please, open." My name's Mateo Alvarez, and I worked housekeeping for 9 years on a cruise ship called the Aurora Belle. If you've ever done this job, you know it's not as glamorous as the brochures make it seem. Most of the crew never see sunlight except through portholes. We clean rooms, fold towels into animal shapes, and smile like we love it. But below the surface, it's endless noise. Vacuums, footsteps, doors slamming, drunks singing, babies crying. Except for room 404. That room was different. Too quiet. Every ship has one cabin like that. The one crew joke about, the one guests ask to change after the first night. You tell yourself it's just coincidence. Air pressure. Bad wiring. Overactive imagination. But I cleaned that room 52 times in 2 years. And I stopped believing in coincidence a long time ago. The first time I noticed something off, it was just a sound. I was new then, still learning the routines. It was turnaround day. Passengers off by 9 a.m. New ones boarding by 1 p.m. I was assigned the midship section on deck 4, rooms 400 to 410. Easy enough. When I opened 404, the air hit me. Cold, dry, metallic, like the smell of a hospital. The thermostat read 23 degrees, normal, but the room felt 5 degrees colder than the hallway. The curtains were open, showing the reflection of the sea against the glass. For a moment I thought I saw someone standing in that reflection, a figure right behind me. But when I turned, no one was there. I brushed it off. New job, long hours, tired eyes. But then the TV switched on by itself. Channel 001, the bow camera, showing the front of the ship cutting through waves. That was normal. Some guests left it on all night like a moving screensaver. Except this cabin had been empty for 6 hours. The remote sat neatly on the bed, batteries removed. I switched it off. 2 minutes later it came back on. Same channel. No static, no glitch. Just the endless sea rolling into darkness. I unplugged the TV, finished cleaning, and moved on. Didn't think much of it. But that night when I came back to the crew quarters, the other attendants were talking about 404. "How long did you last in there?" One of them laughed. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She turned the TV on again?" Another said. "Always Channel 1. They said the story went back years, long before my time. A captain had died in that cabin, maybe of a heart attack, maybe suicide. No one knew for sure. His name wasn't on any roster, but old crew whispered about it. Said he stayed there after retirement on his final voyage. Died alone in the chair by the window facing the sea. Every night since, the TV turned on at the same time, 03:14 a.m. I didn't believe it. Not really. But over the months that followed, I started to see things I couldn't explain. Guests assigned to 404 never stayed the full trip. Some checked out after one night, claiming the AC made strange noises or the TV wouldn't stop turning on. One woman refused to sleep there at all, said the door kept unlocking from the inside while she was in the shower. Another swore she saw her reflection in the TV screen even when it was unplugged. I tried to be rational. Every ship makes noises, pipes, pressure, metal expanding. But what bothered me was how specific the timing always was. Every complaint listed the same hour, 03:14. It became a joke among crew. The captain's shift. Some even left small offerings, candy, cigarettes, a miniature rum bottle on the dresser. And for a while the room behaved. Until the Lisbon voyage. April 2019, that's when things got personal. It was 2:30 a.m., and I was off duty, heading back to the crew quarters after restocking linens. I passed the corridor for Deck 4, silent, lights dimmed to night mode. As I walked by 404, I heard the faint sound of a TV through the door. I stopped. That wasn't possible. No one was checked into that cabin. We were between rotations, repairs scheduled for the next morning. I leaned closer. The TV was definitely on. I could hear the soft murmur of waves, the hum of the ship's engines. Then a man's voice, faint, muffled by static. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a single phrase repeated over and over. I bent down, trying to listen through the door's ventilation panel. That's when I realized something else, and the door handle was warm. I stepped back fast. No cabin door should feel warm, not with AC blowing full force. When I radioed maintenance, they told me no one had entered that section in hours. I stayed outside the door, watching the red "Do Not Disturb" light glow faintly even though no one had said it. Then, at exactly 03:14, the TV volume spiked to full. I jumped. Through the door I could hear the ocean camera feed blaring. Wind, waves, the same mechanical hum of the ship. And then beneath it a low groan, like someone trying to speak underwater. I ran. When I came back with my supervisor 5 minutes later, the sound had stopped. The room was dark. We opened it. Nothing. TV unplugged. Curtains still. Air cold. The only thing out of place was a small wet mark on the floor by the window, shaped roughly like a footprint. Bare. Facing the sea. That was the night I started to believe the stories about 404. I'm not proud of how much 404 got in my head after that night. I've cleaned cabins with blood on the sheets after bar fights, sewage backups, even a small electrical fire on Deck 2. You learn to file things away, to keep moving. But I couldn't file this away. The footprint. The volume spike at 03:14, the warm handle. So I did the one thing we're not supposed to do. I started documenting. I kept it quiet. No group chats, no ghost stories in the crew mess. Just a cheap notebook from the gift shop and my phone. The next 3 turnarounds, whenever 404 was empty, I spent an extra 10 minutes in there at the end of my route, pretending to deep check the mini fridge while I set my phone to record on the dresser, camera pointed at the TV, clock in frame. First pass. Nothing. Just the low hum of air and the bocam reflection in dark glass. Second pass, the TV turned itself on at 03:14, clear as day on the recording. No power to the remote, the set still unplugged from the wall, but the screen glowed anyway, showing the forward feed like always. The volume slider flickered from 0 to 12 in 2 jumps, then settled back to 3. I watched that clip 3 times. My hands shook the third. I took the phone to security because video gets attention, not stories. The night watchman, Kresniki, squinted at my screen and asked, "You plug this into the TV?" I told him no. He shrugged and told me air pressure fluctuations could trip old capacitors. Ghosts don't exist, he said, but he copied the file and promised to check door sensor logs for 404 around that time. 2 days later, on my lunch break, he slid a photocopy across the mess table. No heading, no signature, just 4 lines of the cabin's magnetic door switch history from the previous night. 03:13:59, door ajar, 30 sec. 03.14:29, door secure, deadbolt. Engaged 3:14:31, TV power auto. 13:31, channel 01 bridge feed. He tapped the second line. Deadbolt engaged, he said. From the inside. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. We both understood what that meant. After that, I stopped feeling foolish and started feeling responsible. If something in that room was more than wiring, someone needed to make sure guests weren't sleeping next to it without warning. I went to my supervisor, Anna. She's a woman who has seen everything and wastes no words. I showed the video, the sensor log, my notes. She closed the door to the linen closet and listened while I walked her through the last 2 years of complaints. TV at 03:14. Door opening by itself. Cold air. Drawers pulled out. One guest claiming a whisper woke her at 03:10 saying, "Watch the bow." Anna rubbed her eyes and asked the question the company always asks. What's the operational risk? I told her straight, transfers, refunds, bad reviews. She exhaled and said, "Fine. While we investigate, we'll flag 404 as overflow storage. No guests at night. Day use only." It wasn't official, but it was the best we'd ever get. With the room out of circulation for a few weeks, I had time to test my theory. Pattern, not accident. I checked maintenance tickets for 404 going back 5 years, taking photos when no one was looking. Light flicker, thermostat complaints, TV won't stay off, door alarm false positive. The timestamps lined up like a metronome, most clustered between 03:10 and 03:20, with peaks at 03:14. The older I went, the stranger it got. A work order from 15th April 2011. Guest reports TV turns on to bow cam at 03:14 every night. Technician replaced set. Issue persists. Another from 2012. Door opens 1 inch nightly 03.14. Deadbolt engaged. Latch intact. Noted slight temperature drop at foot of bed. Someone had even written it in the margin in pencil. Captain's time. That word kept circling. Captain. We never had a name. When crew told the story, it was always an outline. Retired officer, final voyage, died quiet in a chair with his shoes on. But rumor is garbage in a uniform. So I looked for paper. Ships keep night orders, handwritten notebooks where the officer on watch leaves instructions. Old ones get boxed and shoved into a narrow archive behind hotel stores where nobody goes unless they're looking for trouble, or a gasket. Anna hates that space, calls it the crypt. I asked to inventory linens and slipped through the steel door with my phone light. Dust, binding glue, rubber bands turned to crumbs. And then the jackpot, Aurora Bell, Night Orders 2003-2008. And behind it a thin folder with a label in fading ink. Guest incident, Deck 4, medical. I sat on a crate and read by flashlight. The night orders from March 16, 2006 mentioned a retired master, traveling incognito, assigned 404 by request. 3 days later, a 03.0 note. Check on Mr. Brennan, ex-Captain Mogg, reported indigestion. The incident report in the thin folder picked up where rumor had been born. Edward J. Brennan, 73, found unresponsive in 404 at approximately 03:20 by his wife. Ship's doctor estimated time of death 03:10 to 03:18 based on temperature and lividity. The field for position of body read, seated in chair by window facing bow. Brennan, a name. The way my chest tightened, you would have thought I knew him. I brought the copies to Anna. She read them slow, then looked at me like I'd dragged salt into the carpet. Mateo, she said quietly, you're not a priest. You're housekeeping. Then she pushed the papers back. But leave 404 dark for now. If the story ended there, I could have kept my distance. But once you hold a name, the room stops being a trick and becomes a place a person died. I started noticing smaller things. A cold patch by the foot of the bed that made my fingers ache in 3 seconds. The curtains drawn just a finger width even when I'd tied them back. A faint salt ring on the carpet by the window that reappeared after shampooing. A shape the size of a shoe sole, toes pointing to the glass. On Lisbon Voyage 2, 4 weeks after my archive dive, security called me at 0250. A guest in 402 had reported a TV turning on by itself. "Wrong room," I said. The officer on duty swore he'd go look. 5 minutes later he radioed back. 402 quiet, 404 glowing under the door. Nobody assigned. TV audio leaking into the corridor, bocam wind. I walked down with him. The hallway was hotel soft, carpet swallowing our steps. At 03:13:55, our door sensor app showed 404's magnet go from green to amber. Door ajar. The handle moved by itself, no hurry. Just a patient half-turn, and the door drifted inward exactly the width of my hand. Cold air brushed my ankles. The TV's volume edged up to 12. I could smell aftershave. Not modern citrus. A thin, dry barbershop scent like talc and bay leaf. For 30 seconds the door hung open to nothing. Then the latch kissed the strike and the deadbolt snicked home. On the TV, the bow camera showed low sea and scattered stars and the blacker black where sky meets water. In the glass, for a breath-long moment, I saw what looked like a white collar and the curve of a jaw just over my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I said in Spanish first and then in English, "Captain Brennan, the room is clean. You can rest." The TV clicked off. Security said power surge into his radio like an amulet against thinking. I signed the incident form with a steady hand and went back downstairs. But I was shaking so hard my keycard wouldn't read the first 2 tries. That morning Anna found me folding towels into swans like a machine and said, without looking up, "If you're going to keep chasing patterns, finish the pattern. You've watched it from the hall. Watch it from inside." I knew what she meant. Stay the night. It was against policy. It was stupid, but I couldn't keep cleaning around a place I only half understood, so I clocked out early. Packed a thermos of coffee, a spare battery, my phone, and a rosary I hadn't touched since I left Veracruz. At Air 155, I used my master to open 404, set the latch so it couldn't lock me out, and sat on the chair by the window where Brennan had died. The bow a dark line across the glass. I hit record. The clock on my phone rolled from 03:12 to 03:13. The room grew colder, like the air pressure had dropped to floor. Somewhere in the ducting, metal pinged. I said, "All right, Captain, I'm listening," and then 03:14 arrived. My name is Kenji. I don't tell this story often because people want neat endings and the ocean doesn't give those. What I saw out there didn't fit any category I was ready for. Mechanical failure, sure. Human failure, definitely. But something else moved under us, and I can't explain it without sounding like I've let the fear rewrite the facts. I'll give you the facts first. The ship was the Ocean Verity, eastbound loop from Miami to Nassau and back with 2 stops in between. I booked last minute after a rough quarter at work. Too much time staring at numbers and not enough sleep. Solo cabin, midship, deck 8. I liked the routine immediately. Coffee at sunrise, laps around the track, cheap trivia in the afternoon, quiet dinners where no one asked me about projections or Q2. The first 2 days, the sea was a sheet of hammered blue metal, and the ship ran like a hotel that learned to float. At 05:02 on day 3, something inside the hull detonated hard enough to knock me out of bed. It wasn't a normal shudder, not the kind you feel when the stabilizers catch a cross swell. This boomed from below like a train coupling slamming full force. My glass hit the carpet and rolled away. Then the entire ship leaned, recovered, and the lights blinked twice. A second later, the alarm took over. 3 rising tones, the ones they play during the safety drill that everyone laughs through. Nobody laughed now. The captain came on, measured voice. "Incident localized in an engine compartment. All guests proceed to your muster stations. This is not a drill." I pulled on shorts, grabbed my life jacket, and stepped into the corridor where everyone suddenly remembered how narrow cruise hallways are. A kid cried somewhere behind me, loud enough to bounce off every door. When we reached the open deck, the air smelled wrong. Plastic, hot oil, something mineral. Black smoke bled from vents near the stern. Crew in orange vests formed a line and started counting rows. A woman next to me kept repeating her cabin number like a spell. People take their comfort where they can find it. We waited like that for an hour. No music, no announcements. Just the mechanical clanks and a low thrumming that didn't belong to anything I recognized on a ship. A petty officer with a clipboard told us the fire suppression had activated and they were verifying boundaries. I used to think that phrase meant safety. It sounded like maybe now. By late morning, the captain returned, still steady but thinner at the edges. Fire contained. We've experienced loss of main propulsion and primary power generation. We are working to restore systems. A careful sentence. In plain words, we were dead in the water. They led us back to cabins. That was when the heat started to build. Without AC, a steel ship in the Caribbean turns into a slow oven. I propped my door open for air until a crewman came by and asked me to close it for containment. Of what? He didn't say. Lunch was crackers and a warm bottle of water handed out from a cart. By evening, they added a protein bar and told us to hydrate responsibly. The toilets worked until they didn't. Then a notice slid under every door. Use designated areas, deck 4 aft, waste bags provided. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand, but because the sentence made my brain stall. Around sunset, a rumor moved along deck 8 faster than the heat. Tugboats had been dispatched. People tried to cheer. Someone started clapping. No one joined. When night came, the ship felt like a city after a blackout. Dark shapes of people on the railings. Voices softer than usual. The ocean louder. That's when I saw the lights. I was on the starboard promenade, away from the bigger crowd. The sea down there was a black sheet with white scrawl where the swell broke against the hull. At first I took the glow for reflections. Someone's phone screen, a drone, anything that made sense. But this wasn't on the surface. It was under us by maybe 50, maybe 100 feet. Clean lines of light like a grid drawn by a hand that hated messy edges. The pattern moved. Not in a drift, on purpose. Lines met and separated with the slow patience of someone counting beats. I stared until my eyes watered, and the longer I watched, the less it looked like any machine I knew. Fish don't travel in rectangles. Submarines don't pulse. A couple came over when they saw me leaning out. I pointed. The woman said, "What is that?" in a voice that sounded like she already knew no one would answer. The man tried to film. His screen showed noise and a smear of gray. He swore, tried again. Same result. Another passenger farther down shouted for his wife to look. Within a minute, there were a dozen of us staring at geometry that lived where the charts say depth and nothing else. The lights held formation under our keel for, time is slippery at sea, call it 40 minutes. Then they drew apart, stretched thin, and vanished all at once like someone cut the power. No fade. Off. Back in the cabin, the heat trapped itself in the corners. I lay on top of the sheets and heard the ship talk to itself in metal tongues. Expansion, contraction, the tick of systems dying and recovering and dying again. Around midnight, a banging started 2 decks below that came and went in sets of 4. I found myself counting them like thunder after lightning. I don't know why, by morning the air had turned sweet sour. The corridor smelled like people trying not to be animals and failing. A crewman handed me 2 more waters in a bag and said, "Please, sir," like a prayer. Behind his eyes I saw the math he was running. How many mouths, how many bottles, how many hours until the next decision. Men turn into arithmetic under pressure. We were supposed to be in Nassau by lunchtime. Instead, we floated on a map that suddenly felt blank. I kept my day small. Sit, drink, conserve, go stand at the rail when my head got tight. Watch the horizon for something with purpose. But purpose belonged to the lights, and they didn't come back while the sun was up. They waited for dark. My name is Kenji. I don't tell this story often because people want neat endings and the ocean doesn't give those. What I saw out there didn't fit any category I was ready for. Mechanical failure, sure. Human failure, definitely. But something else moved under us and I can't explain it without sounding like I've let the fear rewrite the facts. I'll give you the facts first. The ship was the Ocean Verity. Eastbound loop from Miami to Nassau and back with 2 stops in between. I booked last minute after a rough quarter at work. Too much time staring at numbers and not enough sleep. Solo cabin, midship, deck 8. I liked the routine immediately. Coffee at sunrise, laps around the track, cheap trivia in the afternoon, quiet dinners where no one asked me about projections or Q2. The first 2 days, the sea was a sheet of hammered blue metal, and the ship ran like a hotel that learned to float. At 05:02 on day 3, something inside the hull detonated hard enough to knock me out of bed. It wasn't a normal shudder, not the kind you feel when the stabilizers catch a cross swell. This boomed from below like a train coupling slamming full force. My glass hit the carpet and rolled away. Then the entire ship leaned, recovered, and the lights blinked twice. A second later, the alarm took over. 3 rising tones, the ones they play during the safety drill that everyone laughs through. Nobody laughed now. The captain came on, measured voice. Incident localized in an engine compartment. All guests proceed to your muster stations. This is not a drill. I pulled on shorts, grabbed my life jacket, and stepped into the corridor where everyone suddenly remembered how narrow cruise hallways are. A kid cried somewhere behind me, loud enough to bounce off every door. When we reached the open deck, the air smelled wrong. Plastic, hot oil, something mineral. Black smoke bled from vents near the stern. Crew in orange vests formed a line and started counting rows. A woman next to me kept repeating her cabin number like a spell. People take their comfort where they can find it. We waited like that for an hour. No music, no announcements. Just the mechanical clanks and a low thrumming that didn't belong to anything I recognized on a ship. A petty officer with a clipboard told us the fire suppression had activated and they were verifying boundaries. I used to think that phrase meant safety. It sounded like maybe now. By late morning, the captain returned, still steady but thinner at the edges. Fire contained. We've experienced loss of main propulsion and primary power generation. We are working to restore systems. A careful sentence. In plain words, we were dead in the water. They led us back to cabins. That was when the heat started to build. Without AC, a steel ship in the Caribbean turns into a slow oven. I propped my door open for air until a crewman came by and asked me to close it for containment. Of what? He didn't say. Lunch was crackers and a warm bottle of water handed out from a cart. By evening, they added a protein bar and told us to hydrate responsibly. The toilets worked until they didn't. Then a notice slid under every door. Use designated areas, deck 4 aft, waste bags provided. I read it twice, not because I didn't understand, but because the sentence made my brain stall. Around sunset, a rumor moved along deck 8 faster than the heat. Tugboats had been dispatched. People tried to cheer. Someone started clapping. No one joined. When night came, the ship felt like a city after a blackout. Dark shapes of people on the railings. Voices softer than usual. The ocean louder. That's when I saw the lights. I was on the starboard promenade, away from the bigger crowd. The sea down there was a black sheet with white scrawl where the swell broke against the hull. At first I took the glow for reflections. Someone's phone screen, a drone, anything that made sense. But this wasn't on the surface. It was under us by maybe 50, maybe 100 feet. Clean lines of light like a grid drawn by a hand that hated messy edges. The pattern moved. Not in a drift, on purpose. Lines met and separated with the slow patience of someone counting beats. I stared until my eyes watered, and the longer I watched, the less it looked like any machine I knew. Fish don't travel in rectangles. Submarines don't pulse. A couple came over when they saw me leaning out. I pointed. The woman said, "What is that?" in a voice that sounded like she already knew no one would answer. The man tried to film. His screen showed noise and a smear of gray. He swore, tried again. Same result. Another passenger farther down shouted for his wife to look. Within a minute, there were a dozen of us staring at geometry that lived where the charts say depth and nothing else. The lights held formation under our keel for, time is slippery at sea, call it 40 minutes. Then they drew apart, stretched thin, and vanished all at once like someone cut the power. No fade. Off. Back in the cabin, the heat trapped itself in the corners. I lay on top of the sheets and heard the ship talk to itself in metal tongues. Expansion, contraction, the tick of systems dying and recovering and dying again. Around midnight, a banging started 2 decks below that came and went in sets of 4. I found myself counting them like thunder after lightning. I don't know why, by morning the air had turned sweet sour. The corridor smelled like people trying not to be animals and failing. A crewman handed me 2 more waters in a bag and said, "Please, sir," like a prayer. Behind his eyes I saw the math he was running. How many mouths, how many bottles, how many hours until the next decision. Men turn into arithmetic under pressure. We were supposed to be in Nassau by lunchtime. Instead, we floated on a map that suddenly felt blank. I kept my day small. Sit, drink, conserve, go stand at the rail when my head got tight. Watch the horizon for something with purpose. But purpose belonged to the lights, and they didn't come back while the sun was up. They waited for dark. By the second night, the Ocean Verity had stopped pretending things were under control. The captain's voice still came through the PA at scheduled intervals, but you could hear exhaustion hiding under the formal tone. Shorter sentences, longer pauses between words. Each announcement sounded more like an apology than an update. He said tugs were en route. He said power would return within hours. But hours had stretched into days, and nobody on board believed him anymore. The temperature inside my cabin was unbearable. I gave up on sleeping there entirely and started camping on the outer promenade, where at least the wind moved the air. Dozens of passengers did the same. Mattresses dragged from cabins, towels spread out like makeshift beds. Some tried to joke about it, calling it cruise camping. Others just stared at the horizon, hollow-eyed and quiet. The water supply was rationed tighter that day, 1 bottle per person. Crew members in gloves and masks passed them out from carts that used to carry cocktails. Their uniforms were soaked with sweat. You could tell some of them were sick. A few had bandages around their arms or necks like they'd been cut. Sometime around noon I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, like something electrical overheating, but it spread fast. By evening it was everywhere. Plastic, sewage, human waste, cleaning fluid. It all mixed into this hot chemical rot that clung to the back of your throat. Nobody talked about it out loud, but everyone knew the truth. The toilets were overflowing below deck. Someone said the storage tanks were full. Someone else said the pumps had burned out. The truth didn't matter. The smell made it real. At sunset, the crowd started gathering again along the starboard railing. I was one of them. We didn't even need to say what we were waiting for. Everyone knew. The lights. When they came back that night, they were closer, so close that the ocean between us and them wasn't dark anymore, but glowing a pale, unnatural green. They didn't move in the same pattern as before. This time they circled. It started as a ring maybe 200 meters wide, slow and deliberate. Then smaller rings formed inside it, spinning in opposite directions like gears. The sea stayed flat, but the air changed, thicker, quieter. You could feel the vibration in your ribs the same way you feel bass from a concert speaker. A little girl near me started crying. Her father picked her up and said it was the Coast Guard baby. Nobody corrected him, but we all knew the Coast Guard doesn't make the ocean glow. One man started filming again, holding his phone over the railing. I watched his screen. At first it showed the lights clearly, then the feed froze. He swore, restarted the camera, and the entire screen went white. He lowered it and said, It's hot. The metal body of his phone had actually heated up. That's when the first bang came. A heavy metallic crack echoed from the stern, followed by shouts from crew members. Everyone turned. In the faint light we saw a rope, thick as a man's arm, snapping like a whip through the air before vanishing into the dark. The tow line, the tugs had arrived. You could see their blinking navigation lights on the horizon, 2 small dots of red and green. They'd tried to attach to us, but something had gone wrong. Another bang followed, louder this time, and a tremor rolled through the deck under our feet. The ship tilted a few degrees to port. Drinks, bottles, and phones slid across the deck. Someone screamed. Then the PA system crackled. All passengers remained calm. Temporary issue with tow connection. Please stay clear of open rails. The crowd didn't move away. If anything, more people pressed forward trying to see. That's when I saw it. Out beyond the stern, under the surface, the lights were moving toward the tugboats. It looked deliberate. 2 bright shapes, long and sharp like blades of light, cutting through the black water. Each one passed directly beneath a tug. The glow flared for a moment, and both navigation lights on those tugs went out. No explosion. No sound. Just darkness. When the captain came back on the PA 5 minutes later, his voice was shaking. He said the tugs had experienced electrical failure and were attempting to regain control, but none of us could see them anymore. That night, people started turning on each other. The heat, the smell, the fear, it all boiled over. 2 men fought over a case of bottled water from a service cart. A woman fainted near the stairwell, and no one helped her at first. We were too used to hearing noises that meant nothing. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and walked back to Deck 8's interior corridor. That's when I noticed something strange. All along the floor under the doors, a faint light was leaking out, greenish-white, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. Not from every room, just a few. Cabins 812, 814, 820. I crouched and looked closer at one. It wasn't electrical light. It moved like water, reflecting something unseen. Then came the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy, coming from the far end of the corridor. I backed up toward my cabin. The footsteps grew louder, closer, but the air stayed still, like sound without movement, and then they stopped right outside my door. A shadow passed under the gap, a perfect pair of shoes standing still for maybe 5 seconds. Then something tapped the metal once. Not a knock, just a tap, and after that, the hallway lights flickered twice and went black. I didn't sleep again. When dawn finally came, the PA stayed silent for the first time since the fire. No announcements, no music. Only the sound of waves slapping the hull and the faint rattle of loose metal. We'd been drifting for 3 days. Food was nearly gone. People were whispering about rationing air next, and the lights beneath the ship hadn't left. By sunrise on the 4th day, the horizon had lost its color. The world was 2 shades, steel and ash, and the ship felt smaller, like the ocean had risen while we slept. Nobody spoke much. You could hear the fabric of deck chairs flapping and the slap of water against the hull. That was all. At about 09, a shout came from the port railing. A dark shape moved toward us from the east, low and angular. At first we thought tugboat, but as it drew closer, the outline was wrong. No mast, no flag, just a long gray hull with antennas folded flat. Someone near me said Coast Guard, and we all clung to that word. Rescue had a name again. The craft slowed beside us, matching our drift. A loud hailer barked orders in English and something else I couldn't place. The crew formed lines, throwing down rope ladders. We expected noise. Engines, radios, relief. But what came instead was silence broken by a single metallic thud as the ships touched. Then the Verity speakers came alive for the first time in 18 hours. All passengers remain where you are. Do not attempt to board until instructed. It wasn't the captain's voice. It was higher, monotone like a recording. The deck grew quiet. Children stopped crying mid-sob. Adults froze halfway through waves of relief. Everyone listened, waiting for the next line. Containment will commence shortly. That phrase didn't belong to rescue vocabulary. A thin mist rolled off the sea, creeping over the railings. It smelled of copper and ozone. Within minutes, visibility shrank to 30 feet. Shapes moved inside it. Figures in suits, full masks, carrying long poles tipped with blinking lights. They climbed our ladders in pairs, methodical, wordless. The first one reached the deck near me. His visor was opaque black. His suit made a faint hydraulic hiss each time he moved. He looked around, then pointed the pole toward a passenger who'd started forward. The tip pulsed once, and the man collapsed without a sound. Not dead, just down limp as a rag. 2 more suits lifted him and carried him toward the gap between ships. Panic snapped through the crowd. People ran, shouting for help, for water, for anything. The loudhailer boomed again. Stay calm. You will be processed. Do not enter restricted zones. But restricted seemed to mean anywhere they pointed. I backed toward the interior corridor, keeping low. The suited figures spread out across deck 8, moving room by room, checking inside with those glowing wands. Each time the light flashed, the smell of ozone deepened. From the corner of my eye, I caught motion on the sea below. The grid of lights again, sharper now, forming a perfect ring around both vessels. The pulse matched the suit's wands, same rhythm, same color. For the first time, I wondered if the things boarding us and the things beneath us were connected at all. Someone screamed from above. A woman's voice cut short. The sound didn't echo. It was swallowed by the fog like it had weight. I ducked into the stairwell. The metal was slick, vibrating faintly under my hands. The vibration wasn't the engines, it felt. Live down one deck, the corridor lights were dead except for emergency glow strips. Doors hung open. Some cabins were empty. Others still had people inside, unmoving in their bunks. Their skin looked waxy. Not gray like death, but almost translucent like candle wax beginning to melt. I kept moving until I reached the midship lounge, one of the few spaces with a wide window. Outside, the water was luminous again, but this time the pattern had changed. Long spirals turning inward, converging beneath the hull. From the center, a single column of light rose until it touched the ship's underbelly. The hull groaned like something enormous had just latched on. Every emergency light blinked once and died. In the dark, something heavy rolled overhead, a slow, grinding scrape, as if the verity were being turned by hands too big to imagine. People screamed on every deck. Then suddenly gravity returned the wrong way. My knees buckled as the floor tilted 10-15 degrees. Bottles and chairs slid past me. Somewhere distant, metal tore like paper, and then it stopped. No impact, no splash, just stillness. The air smelled of rain again, clean and sharp. A soft hum filled the walls, different from the others, almost musical. Through the window, the spiral lights faded one by one until only black ocean remained. The fog thinned. When I climbed back to the promenade an hour later, the suits were gone. So were most of the passengers. Only a few of us remained, silent, dazed, scattered across the deck like debris after a storm. The sky above was bright now, and on the horizon another vessel approached. Real Coast Guard this time. Orange-white, engines loud, weight-cutting deep. They found us adrift at 24 degree N, 70 south of Andros. The official report said engine fire. Electrical failure, 312 missing, presumed drowned. They never mentioned the lights. In Nassau, I gave my statement to a man in uniform who didn't write anything down. He asked the same question twice. How long were you without power? I told him 3 days. He looked at me strange and said, Sir, your ship was missing for 11. He showed me a list, names of the rescued. I scanned it twice before I realized mine wasn't there. My ID bracelet had no barcode left, just a blackened strip. When they put us on the transport plane back to Miami, the other survivors sat silent, hands folded, staring ahead. Every few minutes, one of them would blink in perfect unison with the plane's cabin lights as if on cue. I tried not to notice. It's been 6 months. I keep waking at 03:14, same as the time stamped on my phone the moment before the blackout started. When I close my eyes, I still see the grid under the water, waiting patiently for something to drift above it. And sometimes, when I'm driving near the coast at night, the radio cuts to static and a calm voice says, "Containment will commence shortly." Then nothing. Just the sound of the sea breathing like it's counting who's left. My name is Rohan. On the Asteria Dawn, I worked nights in the radio room tucked behind the bridge, an unmarked door at the end of the starboard passage, one deck above the officers' mess. Technically, it's not called the radio room anymore. The manuals say GMDSS station, Global Maritime Distress and Safety System. But the job doesn't change. You listen, you log, and when someone says Mayday, you make sure a human being answers. I always volunteered nights. You learn things about a ship when the passengers are asleep. Metal has a different voice after midnight. The helmsman drinks his coffee slower. The ship's wake sounds more like breathing. And the radio. The radio picks up what the day ignores. Every night at 00:00, I ran the same checks. Power to the MFHF set, VHF 16 monitored and loud, DSC alert tested with the test MMSI from the manual, printers loaded with thermal paper, clocks matched to the bridge GPS down to the second. If you ever wonder why ships still keep analog clocks, it's because the ocean loves to make digital lie. The first strange call came on a Wednesday, 01:43 ship's time, somewhere south of Turks and Caicos. We were doing 15 knots on a glassy sea, passengers drunk and happy, crew quiet. I was halfway through an incident report about a lost passport when the DSC set chirped, 3 tones short, like a polite knock on a closed door. The screen printed out a narrow strip of paper. Mayday, MMSI, 23-1046, position, 21-17 and 71-9. Nature flooding time, 06:43, UTCI frowned. The number looked wrong. 7 digits, not 9. MMSIs are 9. The older call signs are letters and numbers, but DSC shouldn't broadcast those. I cleared the printer, checked GPS. Our own position was 21-24 and 71-15W, close enough that if someone really was flooding, we should have seen a radar paint or at least a faint light. I acknowledged on VHF 16 the way the book says, voice steady. Vessel sending DSC distress at 21°17 north, 7109 west. This is passenger vessel Asteria Dawn. We are receiving you. Identify and state persons on board. Silence. Then a voice so thin it felt like it was coming from behind my shoulder instead of the speaker. This is the Mercy Star. Taking water. Pumps are. It cut out like someone had lifted a finger off a button. I scribbled the name. Mercy Star. I hit the bridge phone. I have a distress call, local position. No AIS target. Asking permission to transmit security and alter course. The officer of the watch answered with the voice of a man who had been waiting for a complication. Stand by. We'll check radar and surface search. A minute later, he came into the radio room, tie loosened, hands on the back of my chair, eyes on the speaker. Call again. I did. The speaker scraped with carrier noise like a spoon across a damaged pan. Then the same voice, clearer, older, British or Irish, hard to tell on a bad day. Mercy Star, 4 souls, engine compartment flooded, battery under. Static swallowed the last word. The tone wasn't panic. It had that resigned shape mariners get when they've done the math and don't like the answer. Bridge reported nothing on radar. The AIS screen stayed empty, just our own green triangle. The lookout stepped into the dark and scanned with binoculars, because that's what you do even when you don't expect to find anything. The sea stayed smooth and blank. I sent a Mayday relay anyway. voice on VHF-16 and MF-21A2, and triggered the Navtech safety broadcast with the position. Procedure is a comfort. It gives your hand something to do while your head argues with the water. 5 minutes later, the DSC chirped again, same wrong MMSI, same position. Only the UTC time was 06:41, 2 minutes earlier than the first. The printer spat the tape like it wanted the paper out of its mouth. The officer and I traded a look we didn't have a word for. Could be a test transmission bouncing off the layer, he said finally. Or a prank. No one pranks with Mayday. You don't do that to men who wake when the sea moves in their sleep. I tried MF 2187.5 again. Mercy Star, this is Asteria Dawn. Say again. Persons on board. Your freeboard. Condition of bilge. A pause. Another carrier scrape. Then a whisper. I still hear when the apartment upstairs runs water at night. I can't find the sky. The officer's hand tightened on the chair. What? The voice didn't answer. The DSC alarm chirped a third time. Same number, same words, and the UTC stamp now read 0638. Backwards. I checked our time sync against GPS again. Perfect. I checked the battery backup clock, the one that drifts a second a month. Perfect. My watch. Perfect. The only thing that wasn't perfect was the ocean. We stayed on station an hour, circling a slow box around the coordinates, engines humming like a calm heart. The searchlight swept the water into hard white shapes. Nothing reflected back except our own wake and a pelican that shouldn't have been that far offshore. The officer made the call I knew he'd make. Resume course. File and forward. I wrote the log the way the Solus manual demands. Clean and neutral. Air 143 LT distress DSC received. Uncorrelated. Mayday relay issued. Search negative. All stations advised. I stapled the 3 thin, wrong tapes to the page with a hand that wouldn't completely stop shaking. The second event was 2 nights later. Different sea, different sky, same hour. We were a beam of Great Inagua pushing south. The DSC alarm wailed this time, not the polite knock, the full distress tone that tastes metallic in your mouth when you hear it on a quiet bridge. The tape printed with the 9-digit block this time. Mayday, MMSI, 366-941-000. Position 20°56 and 73°02W. Nature, fire time, 06.44. UTCUS flagged MMSI block. Looks normal. I keyed 16 and said the words. A man answered instantly. This is the Saint. Evelyn on fire in the galley. We need... He coughed. A woman shouted something behind him. Could have been a name or a prayer. The radio makes no distinction. We plotted the position. We were 40 minutes away at best speed. The bridge requested course alteration from the captain. Granted. Every time a passenger ship moves for a distress, you can feel the soul of the company wince and then accept it. You help. That's a law older than all the books. 10 minutes into the turn, AIS painted a target dead ahead. St. Evelyn, a small freighter icon. Relief hit my chest hard enough to notice. We had someone to hand our courage to. Visual? The officer asked the lookout. Silence. Then, Sir, I see. I don't see. He stopped like his brain had lost a step. No vessel, just the AIS tag. The tag slid across the screen, then froze. Range 3.2 miles, bearing steady. We should have seen mast lights at least. We saw nothing. St. Evelyn, this is passenger vessel Asteria Dawn. We are on course to you. How many on board? The answer came soft, almost content. 12 souls. And a cat. I wrote 12 plus cat in the margin because the hand wants to do something human when the head can't. 3 minutes later, the AIS target blinked gray and vanished. The DSC set printed another strip. Same MMSI, same words, but the UTC time now read or 6:41. If you've ever watched a tide turn, you know the feeling of something you trust reversing without permission. We reached the coordinates and found only water. The searchlight painted nothing except wind and our own fear. We relayed, we logged. We resumed course. I could have blamed ionospheric skip, forged MMSIs, pirates with toys. I tried on each explanation like a jacket and found none that fit. The third night, I stopped bringing explanations to work and started bringing coffee. I made it to Aura 140 without incident. Then a faint carrier opened on 16. No tone, no DSC. A voice I recognized as my own captain said, "Asteria Dawn to Asteria Dawn, do you copy?" I didn't touch the mic. The officer beside me didn't breathe. The voice continued, a half second out of sync with the air in the room, as if played through a cheap speaker in another room. "If you receive this, do not anchor. I say again, do not anchor." The clock on the panel read 01:43. The printer was still. The ocean somewhere was changing shape. I keyed the mic with a thumb that felt foreign to me. "Station calling Asteria Dawn on 16. Say again, and identify." Silence. Then the same voice, our captain's timbre exactly, said something I remember word for word, and wish I didn't. "You are already late." The carrier died. I stared at the speaker as if it might explain itself, then reached for the logbook because habit is the only religion I truly practice. I wrote the time, the words, drew a thin box around them so I wouldn't lose them in the sea of ordinary. On the bridge, both officers watched me write like they were waiting for the letters to tilt. No one asked me what I thought. Night makes smart men superstitious. That was the night I stopped believing the radio tells you only what's there. Sometimes it tells you what's about to be, and sometimes it tells you what's already happened but hasn't found you yet. We were 3 days from the place where all of it would intersect. Our course line, their coordinates, and the sound of our own ship calling us from somewhere we couldn't see. I didn't know that then. I only knew I had started hearing the ocean speak in numbers and names that didn't exist, and I kept listening. By the time the third night ended, sleep was a rumor. Even off duty, I found myself listening, every pipe hum, every distant door latch turning into radio hiss in my head. The ocean outside was calm, but too calm, as if waiting for me to tune in. At 23:00, the captain ordered an equipment inspection. For peace of mind, 2 technicians crawled through the racks, swapped fuses, tested antennas. Everything passed. The captain stood behind me afterward and said quietly, "If it happens again, record everything. No filters." Then he left, and I was alone with the soft pulse of carrier noise. 1:39. The room temperature dropped 2 degrees. The kind of chill that makes you notice your breath. The VHF meter spiked. A faint voice pushed through static. Not a mayday tone this time, just a call sign. "Mercy Star. Testing channel." Same name, same rhythm of speech. My stomach nodded. I keyed the mic. "Mercy Star, this is passenger vessel Asteria Dawn. We read you faint but clear. Confirm your position." Static clawed through. Then, "We're still here." Flooding contained, lights. Coming back for a second, relief. Then I looked at the printer. The DSC set had automatically logged another distress. Same coordinates as before, only the date now read March 16, 2006. I checked our own calendar on the wall. 2023. When I looked up again, the voice continued, overlapping itself. Words smearing like a tape loop. "Water's up to the Mercy Star. 4 souls. Can't find the sky." The repetition built until every speaker on the panel hissed with it. I yanked the volume down, heart hammering. Bridge called, panicked. Radio, what the hell are you transmitting? It's feeding through navigation. I told them it wasn't me. They didn't believe me until every other radio on the bridge, even the handhelds, whispered the same thing in perfect sync. 4 souls, taking water. Then nothing. All channels dead. The captain came down 5 minutes later. He read the timestamp on the new DSC printout, looked at the old ones and asked, "Why does it always say 0314 UTC? I hadn't noticed that before. Every single distress, even the captain's voice calling from nowhere, had the same minute mark. 314. He left the tape in my hand and said only, "Keep the frequency open." The next day, maintenance traced a ground fault to deck 13. Technically, the Asteria didn't have a deck 13. The numbering skipped from 12 to 14. Superstition baked into steel. But there was a narrow service level between them used for wiring and HVAC ducts. That night the captain wanted a crew to inspect it. He chose me to handle comms. The 2 engineers who volunteered were practical men, Morales and Finch. They carried headlamps, radios, and a kind of comm you only find in people who don't believe in ghosts. At 2350, their voices crackled through my headset. "Entering maintenance deck now. Power isolated," I logged the time. For 20 minutes all I heard was the clank of tools and the shuffle of boots. Then Finch's voice. "Seeing old wiring junctions here, looks burnt. Someone spliced extra coax into the main radio line. Doesn't match schematics." The captain leaned over my shoulder. "Ask them if it's active." I did. Morales answered, "Stand by." A pause. Then his voice came back sharper, breathing hard. "Sir, there's another feed down here. Looks like a repeater. It's running off an independent battery." Static roared suddenly across the line, louder than feedback. I pulled the headset away. The volume meter slammed red. The speakers filled with a layered voice, dozens at once, repeating the same phrase in staggered rhythm. "Mayday. Mayday. Mayday." Bridge audio confirmed the same on every open channel. The captain barked into the mic, "Morales, kill that power source." No answer, only the echo of breathing. Then Finch came through, gasping. He's gone, sir." He walked into the dark end of the corridor and I can hear water. It's under the floor." We cut transmission. Security raced to the service access. I waited, counting heartbeats. When they returned an hour later, they said the passageway was dry, sealed, and empty. No Morales. No tools. The next evening, the captain locked the radio room and ordered all communications routed through me alone. "No chatter," he said. "Record, don't respond." He stayed beside me through the midnight hour. 43 again. The same cold sweep through the room. The printer started by itself, feeding out paper with no signal tone preceding it. The letters printed slow, one by one, like a typewriter struggling for air. St. Evelyn, fire contained, course holding, 270, 12 souls, plus 1 cat. Then another line appeared under it. "Thank you for hearing us." The captain stared, whispering, "That's impossible." Because the St. Evelyn had existed. She'd burned and sunk in 2006, same year as the Mercy Star, same coordinates. I found her entry later in the Coast Guard casualty list. No survivors. He grabbed the paper, hands trembling. "They're repeating," he said. "Every transmission we've received, and it's the same ships, same times." I looked at the clock. 0314 again, the speakers hissed. Then one by one the inactive sets in the rack powered themselves on. Their indicator lights glowed sea green instead of orange. Every channel filled with faint sound, not static, but breathing steady and rhythmic like the ocean itself had taken a microphone. The captain reached for the main breaker. Before he could pull it, a voice came through all sets at once. "Do not silence the distress." It wasn't shouting. It didn't need to. It carried the same calm authority that made men obey. The captain froze, hand inches from the switch. I said, "Sir, you have to." They're still waiting for a reply. And then, through the open bridge channel, the Asteria's own ID broadcast automatically on a loop. "Mayday. Passenger vessel Asteria Dawn, position 21-17 and 71-9W flooding. Our own coordinates. The captain ripped the breaker. Darkness swallowed the room. The only light came from the emergency lamp above the logbook. The printer stopped mid-sentence. When the lights came back, all systems rebooted clean, logs erased. Only one strip of paper remained, half burned against the roller. The last line legible before the ink melted read 0314, reply received. The next morning, the captain ordered all external transmitters shut down and sealed under his authority. Only the satellite system remained active, just enough for position reporting and company updates. He told the passengers there'd been a communications issue and assured them everything was fine. But the crew knew something wasn't. Morales was still missing. Engineering swore they'd searched every crawl space. Deck 13 was sealed again, officially for electrical maintenance. I hadn't slept. The radio room smelled of hot dust and coffee that had gone metallic from sitting too long on the warmer. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that layered voice saying, "Do not silence the distress." By 21, the captain stopped pretending it was a technical problem. He came into the room without knocking, face pale, shirt untucked. He said quietly, "The company told us to log the interference as atmospheric. They don't want this in the reports." Then he looked at me like a man asking for permission he didn't need. "We're going back down there. I want to see Deck 13 myself." He brought me Finch and one of the security officers, 4 flashlights, 2 radios. We pried open the access hatch behind the refrigeration hold. The air that came out was wrong. Cold, damp, smelling of iron and ozone. The passage beyond looked like a lung. Curved metal ribs running the length of the ship, cables snaking along both sides. It wasn't on any schematic I'd ever seen. The deck plate underfoot was rusted but wet, as if condensation dripped upward instead of down. We followed the sound of faint humming. It wasn't machinery and too rhythmic. It rose and fell like breathing. At the far end, behind a warped bulkhead, a door stood half open. Inside was a narrow compartment lined with outdated radio gear, long dead. On the floor sat a marine battery attached to a tangled loop of coiled antenna wire, and a single still-glowing repeater unit. The casing was marked with a label half peeled away, but the serial number was clear. MMSI 231046. The same 7 digits from the first Mercy Star distress. Finch swore under his breath. "Someone built a booster down here, but this tech is ancient." The captain stepped forward, running his hand over the dust. "Not ancient," he said softly. "This is 2006 equipment. Same year both ships went down." The repeater suddenly clicked and the speaker came alive. A burst of static followed by a voice so faint we leaned in instinctively. "St. Evelyn, we see your lights. Thank you for hearing us." Finch backed away fast. "Sir, that's impossible. That's a recording." But the words kept coming, overlapping, echoing, hundreds of voices now weaving through each other until the sound filled every inch of metal around us. The captain whispered, "It's transmitting on every emergency frequency." He tried to shut it off. The switch wouldn't move. It wasn't jammed, and it just didn't exist anymore when you touched it. My fingers met air where the toggle should have been. The lights dimmed. The repeater began printing on its own, feeding out tape. I caught it before it hit the floor. The first line, Asteria Dawn, distress received. The second line printed slower, like something was forcing its way through. Proceed to assist. Coordinates follow. The coordinates were our own. I felt the deck vibrate. Above us, the muffled rumble of engines starting up. On their own. The captain yelled into his handheld, demanding the bridge confirm, but no one answered. The static in his earpiece screamed back, "Asteria Dawn. Asteria Dawn." We ran. Halfway back, Finch's flashlight beam caught something at the end of the corridor. Water seeping through the seams of the bulkhead. Slow, deliberate, rising with each heartbeat. It smelled like rust and salt. We climbed the ladder to deck 12, bursting into the service galley. The lights overhead flickered between red and white. The entire ship tilted 2 degrees starboard, a slow lean like something was tugging at us from below. The captain shouted orders through his radio. "Bridge, kill propulsion. Do you read?" No reply. Only the faint sound of our own mayday looping back through the speakers. We reached the bridge. Empty. The helmsman's chair spun slowly on its bearings. The compass light blinked. The navigation display still showed our route, but every label on the chart had been replaced with one phrase repeated over and over. 0314, reply received. The ship's log printer activated again, spewing line after line of our own transmissions from the last 3 days, each timestamp reversed by 1 minute from the real time, as if we were moving backward through our own broadcasts. Finch whispered, "It's not repeating us. It's rewriting us." Outside the bridge windows, the horizon was no longer dark ocean but a dim, rippling field of light, like the sea itself had turned to glass and something beneath was shining through. The captain turned to me. "Can you kill the power from here?" "No, sir. It's routing through the repeater." "Then we destroy it." We ran back down. The corridor was knee-deep in water now. The repeater still glowed, voice calm as ever. "Do not silence the distress." The captain raised the fire axe from the wall and swung. The blade hit the casing, sparks flying. The moment the metal split, the entire ship seemed to exhale. Lights flared white, then everything went dark. The next thing I remember is waking up in the lifeboat at dawn. The sea was calm, no sign of the Asteria dawn, just a faint electrical hum under the water fading as the sun rose. The Coast Guard found 12 of us adrift near the Bahamas 3 days later. They said there was no record of any distress from our ship, no radar echo, no debris field. The company said the Asteria Dawn never left Nassau. Maintenance delay. But when I unpacked the survival bag they'd given me, I found a strip of burned thermal paper folded inside. I didn't put it there. The letters were faint but clear. Mayday. Passenger vessel Asteria Dawn flooding. 0314. Reply received. Sometimes, late at night, my phone buzzes with no caller ID. When I answer, all I hear is the sound of water moving steadily through metal, and a voice that whispers, "We still can't find the sky."